Well, welcome everyone to the Coalition for Marriage YouTube channel. If you're joining us for the first time, especially warm welcome to you. It's a privilege to have you with us today, a very special edition because we're celebrating 10 years of the Coalition for Marriage. And we've got a very special guest, the director of our board, to talk us through what's happened during that 10-year period, why the Coalition for Marriage was set up in the first place. It's a privilege to welcome Colin Hart. Our actual birthday, of course, is Sunday, the 20th of February, 2022. Will be 10 years old. Colin, would you like to say hello?
Hello. Technology is working wonderfully well.
It is, isn't it? Which is you can't always rely on that. Colin, I'm curious. I wasn't around when the Coalition for Marriage was set up. Can you start by telling us, first of all, why it came into existence in the first place?
Well, it came into existence because the government was proposing to legalize same-sex marriage. And of course, David Cameron fought an election promising not to legalize same-sex marriage. But as time went on, we didn't really believe him. So we set up the Coalition for Marriage, which was a coalition of individuals and organizations that wanted to take a stand defending real marriage.
Now, the Coalition for Marriage is Britain's largest pro-marriage organization supporting one man, one woman marriage. Why is that so important, do you think?
Well, it's so important because people today might acknowledge the benefits of marriage, but what they don't seem so keen to talk about is the fact that it's a dad and a mum that bring the benefits to children, really. And it's not any configuration of adults. It's really that key partnership, which is unique. And so that's marriage. And we want to defend marriage as between one man and one woman to the exclusion of all others for life. That was the definition before the change in the law. And that's what we believe in.
So C4M is Britain's largest pro-marriage organisation. We represent individuals and groups who support one man, one woman marriage. And we don't come at this from a faith basis because we have members from all faiths and none. We come at it from the point of view of secular evidence, because all the evidence suggests, Colin, does it not, that marriage or a child growing up with its biological mother and father in a married environment is best for that child in terms of better outcomes. It's best for the adults, for the males, for the females. It's best for general income levels, all sorts of positive metrics, and it's best for society as a whole. And that's not a close run thing. The international body of evidence shows that marriage is best by far. Would you agree with that, Colin?
Absolutely right. And it's so important that the truth is defended, and we need to do that. And what we don't want to see is the truth about marriage all hushed up. And that's really one of the key reasons why C4M exists.
And perhaps I can touch on this straight away. It's not homophobic to say that marriage is something which is between a man and a woman. And that's the thing that turns out from the literature, from all the evidence, is a special thing. It's not homophobic to say that, is it?
Well, if you have a same-sex couple, no matter how good a dad is, they can't be a mum. And that's really the issue. It's that unique partnership between a man and a woman that marriage brings. That's all the benefits. A man and a woman in a permanent relationship, that they love each other as much as they love their children. And that's the key thing, really, that marriage is. And as I say, it doesn't matter how good a dad you are, you can't be a mum, or how good a mum you are, you're not a dad. And that's the unique thing we really want to defend.
Yeah. I look at the analogy of salt, which is a sodium atom and a chloride atom. And when they're together, they form something very special called salt. And as soon as you try and redefine salt to include things that might look like salt or feel like salt, let's say sugar, you lose everything and you lose the benefits of salt and you risk messing everything up. And saying that is not phobic to any chemical whatsoever. It just is what it is. And marriage is that thing which only one man and one woman can do.
Yeah.
And saying that doesn't cause, it's not meant to cause offense to anybody. It just is what it is.
Yeah, no matter how much you look at a circle, it's not a square. You know, a square is not a circle. They're just different. And but they make real consequences for young people and the adults involved.
Yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it? And now, way back when the organization started, and I often get the question, are we a charity? We're not a charity. We're set up as a not-for-profit company limited by guarantee. Would you like to tell us a little bit about why we chose that setup as opposed to maybe a charity?
Well, we didn't do that because we would be fighting complaints to the Charity Commission all the time if we were a charity. So we just thought it'd be wise not to do that. There are lots of charities that care about the family and are concerned about that and do research, and that's fine. But where you're involved in a political campaign, that's really all you're doing, then that was the wisest course, really, we thought.
So at the beginning, as I understand it, there was an awful lot of unity. There are a large range of disparate groups and individuals involved, but there was a deep sense of unity around the purpose of supporting real marriage, something which was even noted by our opponents. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's right. Many of us wouldn't agree about many things, the different groups that came together, and different individuals that came together. There were a number of people that came from the Christian faith, and obviously they would agree about quite a lot of things, but there were also other people. There were Muslims that were supporting us as well, and Jews, and all sorts of people of no religious faith at all. But we came together on this one issue, and we thought it was very, very important that we fight a professional campaign. We were careful with how we presented the issue, how we stood for marriage. And Sharon James once did a debate with someone from Stonewall, and afterwards he commented that that the C4M campaign had been conducted on a very clear and respectful basis, and that was good. That was a nice compliment from somebody who was an opponent of our campaign.
Eventually, we didn't win the debates, and the bill was passed with an overwhelming majority in the House of Commons. Was there anything you think that we could have done differently or better?
Well, I've often thought about that, but in a way the problem was that there wasn't a debate in the country. You know, at least in Ireland, there was a debate. There was a referendum, and in many states in America there were debates. But you know, it's a bit like what happened in the Supreme Court of the United States. Same-sex marriage came about because of legal activism. In this country, it came about because the Prime Minister of the day, David Cameron, just used his powers to get it through, and having really said one thing to the electorate and then really changed his mind. He got it through not with his own party, because most of his backbenchers voted against same-sex marriage. He got it through with the support of other parties. So it was a very contentious issue, and there wasn't really a proper debate in the country. So that was very frustrating. So was there anything we could have done? Well, I suppose that's with hindsight, it would have been to really try and pin down politicians at election time, the election before, where they stand on the issue of same-sex marriage. Perhaps we could have done more on that. But I think given the party leaders at the time, Nick Clegg and David Cameron, you could see now with hindsight they were determined to push this through. Even at the damage of their own parties. I don't think it particularly helped their own parties to push this through, because many members of their own parties didn't agree with it.
So, Colin, you mentioned Nick Clegg, and perhaps we'll talk about him again later on in the interview. But afterwards, after the dust had settled on the bill, if you like, and the law was passed, something happened with the Office for National Statistics that got our attention. Can you tell us a little bit about what they planned and what we said and what happened in the end?
Yeah, what they planned to do was to merge the statistics for traditional marriages, man and woman, and also with same-sex marriages. So they were going to put them all in together. So that would have meant that no one could ever have done any research on the effect of man-woman marriage as opposed to other forms of relationship. So you, for example, you could not have done research on the benefits of marriage for children because all the different types of same-sex marriages, opposite-sex marriages would have all been merged together. So we thought, this is terrible. This is a permanent thing that would affect the whole future of getting research about the family. So we urged our supporters to complain, and they did in their droves. And we managed to get the Office for National Statistics to back down on that and to keep separate statistics, which is really great. And that means that in the future, academics can do that sort of research.
Yeah, and they can say, for example, that last year, same-sex couple divorce rates went up by 40% compared on the previous year, which you wouldn't have been able to tell otherwise.
No, that's right.
As well as that, I understand that there was an awful lot of pressure on people to comply and, what we might say today, celebrate same-sex marriages, and that a lot of legal cases came about, and that there were legal challenges in the courts and a lot of pressure in other parts of society. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And give us a couple of examples.
That's right. There was a lot of pressure in schools, on teachers, and on young people to agree with same-sex marriage. And that led to a lot of problems for employees in some cases. And I'd just highlight two cases, Felix Ngole and the Ashes cases. Two cases. They won them both. One was a social worker, Felix Ngole. The other, the Ashes Bakery, was a business. Both challenged on the issue of their belief in marriage. And they won their cases after having to fight. And that was a very, very hard thing to do. And it took quite a time to get justice. But that shows you what was going on. And it shows you also that the law is clear, that we can still believe in same-sex marriage, that same-sex marriage is wrong, and that true marriage is between one man and one woman. I think often activists, certainly in those early years, and it's still true today in many public sector organisations, they seem to believe that because Parliament legalised same-sex marriage, they also criminalise those who disagree. That's the way that they go on. And of course, that's completely untrue.
And I think it's important to note that it's because of C4M and other organisations campaigning that there were, in fact, protections put into the law at the time in many different ways to allow people to express their beliefs on what marriage should constitute.
That's right. That's right. There was a lot of good guidance that was produced, for example, from the Department for Education. Now, the problem was that that guidance was ignored in many cases in schools, but there was some good guidance that came out, and there were protections there, but sadly they weren't always followed or adhered to. And so that's really been the battle that C4M has had. We've got a right to be heard. Many saying we don't, but we do. And it's quite clear that sometimes our opponents have well exaggerated their case, really, and almost acted as though we have no right even to exist. And that's just not true, because time after time, where there have been actions taken against individuals because of their belief in marriage, they've lost in the courts. I think we need to realize and remember we do have that freedom, so let's use it to speak out.
So the law is quite clear, and we won't go into the case law and the statute, which is very clear about it's perfectly acceptable to hold the belief that marriage should just be between one man and one woman, and to express that belief, obviously courteously, politely, but to express that belief is a perfectly legal thing.
Yeah, that's right.
But then we have this kind of chilling effect in society, which is the Twitter mob, the online mobs, the idea that your employer might not want the fuss and sack you anyway. So it's a difficult time.
Well, I mean, during the campaign, Nick Clegg, I think it was in September 2012, Nick Clegg gave a speech, and he circulated copies of his speech to the press, and he called supporters of marriage bigots. It was called Bigotgate. And so, that had been going on during the campaign. And so it creates a sort of atmosphere where if you believe in marriage, you are a bigot, according to Nick Clegg. So So that is the problem. That sort of propaganda is used to intimidate, really, people who disagree. And that's the problem that we've had. But how important it is, therefore, to stick together and to stand up for what is right and to make the case for marriage, which is really what we've been doing over the past 10 years.
And I think that's why we can call ourselves the largest pro-marriage organization in the country, because there are a lot of people who, while they might not be brave enough to stand up and speak themselves, actually do believe in one man, one woman marriage as the only definition of marriage, and have joined with us because of that, which is a good thing. Moving on then, so that's where we've got to, what we've been doing. We're also involved in lots of different types of campaigns. One recent one, again, was this campaign around no-fault divorce. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that and how that worked out?
In the definition of marriage, which we all unified around, that was the basis. And that was the one thing that we did, defend the definition of marriage, that marriage is the union of one man and one woman to the exclusion of all others for life. And it's the for life bit that's so important as well. No-fault divorce just says it's not for life. It's a temporary union. So that there doesn't need to be a fault. If there's something, if you want to get rid of your mobile phone contract, you have to have a reason. There has to be a fault in your contract. It's easier to get out of your marriage than it is to get rid of your phone, or to get rid of a contract. A hire purchase agreement or something like that is much tougher to get out of than your marriage.
But you're not saying people should never be allowed to divorce.
Well, there's got to be a reason for it. And there's got to be a fault, and saying there's not even a possibility of saying that, say, adultery or desertion is wrong, that's bad. I mean, what about the innocent party in all this? Can't they have the right to cite those reasons? But no, not in no-fault divorce. And of course, what it will mean is that the whole divorce process will be speeded up. And the good thing about the old law, which is just about to change as the law is introduced, the fully no-fault divorce law is introduced very soon. The thing about the old law is that people get off the conveyor belt. People think again. And it's great that they do. Thousands of people, they may file for divorce, but they have a change of heart during the divorce process. But if you speed up that conveyor belt, which is what no-fault divorce does, then the opportunity to get off will be more limited, and it'll be over before they know it, really. And there won't be that opportunity to think again, which is really what we need.
Yeah, there's got to be something which distinguishes marriage from not being married, and one of those things is the inability just to walk away on a whim, if you like. And the idea, as I'm sure any of our listeners who have been married for a while will attest to, marriage isn't always easy, and it's difficult. And the knowledge that you're in this for good forever together means you've got to work things through, and it makes you work things through. If it's just easy to walk away, that's no security and no way to have a marriage. And that would be absolutely awful. If I thought I wasn't behaving well one day, my wife could just go for whatever reason she chose. What a terrible thing that would be, and what a terrible life to live.
The fact that you made that mutual promise, means that you work things through. And if you've never made that promise, then that creates instability in the relationship from the word go. And so marriage is very different. Marriage is a public commitment, one to the other, and it's very important.
What about, can I ask, Colin, the legal profession seemed to be completely behind it, as far as I could tell.
Yes, they do. And
what's that about?
Well, I think that one reason is they want to make things quicker and simpler for them. They genuinely, I thought, many of them do not like people getting divorced. They can see the pain and the heartache involved. And they somehow think that making the divorce process slicker will minimize the pain, but it's not the mechanism of divorce that's the problem. It's the fact of divorce. And that pain and heartache increases after divorce. It isn't over. I mean, obviously there are extreme cases of abuse where that isn't the case, but in the vast majority of divorces, it's because of differences. It's because of falling out of love and those sorts of reasons. It's not because of abuse. That's only a tiny minority of cases, and you can see why the law does need to step in those cases. But what we have is people thinking that the grass is greener, and perhaps solicitors and lawyers think, well, look, if we can just get this over as quickly as possible, get through it, that'll make things easier. Well, no, it won't, because if you don't have a wife or you don't have a husband, if a child doesn't have their mum or their dad, that is going to be very, very difficult. So the divorce process is not so much the issue as the fact of divorce, really.
And I think if I recall the process correctly, some of the research drawn on to back up the case for no-fault divorce was, well, cherry-picked is a polite way of looking at it, maybe. And also the public consultation was quite clearly against no-fault divorce, yet we had it anyway.
That's right. And of course, it was in lockdown.
Yeah.
We were in the toughest lockdowns then, and it was very difficult even to see your MP or make representations. So, yeah, that went through, and that was terrible. Not the first time it's been tried. It was first tried in 1996, but the whole legislation unravelled in pilot schemes, and the incoming Labour government of Tony Blair didn't implement the legislation. But I think there will be a lot of problems, and we want to keep marriages together. We want to, those who are struggling, we need to save marriages, not to break them up more effectively, which is what this law will do.
And if you look at the last figures, the cost of broken marriages in the UK, in terms of picking up housing costs, picking up education costs in terms of criminal justice system, estimated at 51 billion, which is the same as our national defence budget, compared to how much the government spend on marriage support, if you like, which is estimated about 17 million, tiny fraction compared to other countries that might be doing a lot more in that respect.
Well, you're really investing in, if you're supporting marriage, you're investing in the future. That's what we should be doing, not making divorce easier.
So let's pick up on the future a little bit then, current and future struggles ahead of C4M in terms of there's always something going on somewhere attacking the definition of marriage. And let's look at a couple of those things. So the current debate around gender and this question about, is there a definition of a man and a woman anymore? Is it biological, or is it in fact just cerebral? Can you think yourself into a different gender?
I mean, our politicians don't seem to know, do they, what a man is and what a woman is. So it's a terrible state. But of course, you redefine marriage, that's just accelerated the whole transgender rights movement, and that's what we've seen. And we always said that if you redefine marriage, it'll lead to other redefinitions, and that's been proved to be true. And
so quickly as well, so quickly.
Very, very rapidly. Very, very rapidly. And see, so marriage has become any configuration of two adults. And now even you can change your genders. And we're glad at least that the government at Westminster decided not to go down the Nicola Sturgeon route of having people to be able to change their sex almost while you wait. And really speed things up massively. Currently, there is a 2-year wait, and you need the consent of 2 doctors, one of which must be a psychiatrist. And so there are some checks and balances in the system, but the proposal is really to cut that down to a matter of months. That's been rejected at Westminster, although there are still many MPs that want that, but the government have rejected that at the moment. But it is going to go ahead in Scotland, which will be an absolute disaster, I think, really. So the transgender thing has been a big debate. And as you said, that came very, very rapidly after the redefinition of marriage.
And also it's being imposed in schools these days. And this is a worrying trend as well, that actually the ability for parents to be able to control what their children are being taught is being significantly restricted in different parts of the UK, and that some of these ideologies are being taught as fact to very, very young children.
That's right. I mean, we're interested in the transgender issue because it really demolishes the definition of marriage. If you don't have a man and you don't have a woman, then you certainly don't have a definition of marriage. So it's only as part of that we're really concerned. But it is very concerning, say that in Wales, the right of parents to have their children excused from sex education. It's now called something completely different in Wales, but there's no right to have your child excused at all. It's a mandatory state lessons on sexuality, and that is very bad, and it's very, very wrong indeed. And we're still now in the middle of all of this. I'm sure we're beginning to see some good outcomes. So there was the Mayor for Stator case. A lady made a comment about women being women on Twitter, and she has she was told in court that the right to criticize the transgender movement was not a right that should be respected in a democratic society. And she's just had that overturned, and her case will now be reheard. And so there is a bit of a fight back, and the Harry Miller case was a really significant victory there, where you had a former police officer who had made some comments on Twitter, was visited by two police officers in his work for what he had said, even though he'd not broken any law. And he's now won his case, and that has meant that the College of Policing guidance needs now to be rewritten. So that is great. That is being challenged now. We're still seeing lots of battles. But it's so important that we understand that even children have the right not to be manipulated, not to be coerced into believing that you can just change your sex at will. And that needs to be respected in schools. And sadly, it isn't in some cases.
And dare I say, so instead of parents being the primary educators, so in Wales now, the state's saying, we will teach your children what we want to teach them, and you have no say in it, I think is a line crossed. And it's a step, it's overreach by a government, I think.
Yes, I think it is. And they certainly talked about safeguards there, but what they've actually done is not introduce different safeguards, but there's no safeguards at all. And that will immediately clash. Whatever the Welsh government thinks, in fact, there are overarching laws that will protect young people, that will protect teachers. And they've just set themselves up for a clash with things like human rights laws. And there are other laws, other good laws that are there. And it's so sad that they didn't respect those laws when drafting their legislation.
And something else on the horizon, polyamory, the idea that it needn't be just two people in a marriage, it could be more than two. There are more and more press articles coming out looking at law changes in the US and other places, in parts of the US and other places that adopt polyamory. It feels like the way things, we noticed through COVID, that often you'd see things creep into the newspapers and Twitter before they became pushed from a legal basis.
That was certainly true with same-sex marriage. 20 years before same-sex marriage was introduced, there were discussions amongst legal academics about same-sex marriage, and we're seeing now that on polygamous marriages being legalized, and so that's now going on. There are university textbooks being published which are supportive of polygamy, and that's now happening, and that can only gain pace if it's not challenged, and that is something where we may well need to challenge that in the future.
And what about, there's currently this debate around the ban on so-called conversion therapy, and I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what the implications are for marriage potentially from that. but also as an adjunct. And it's interesting how we end up responding to the other side's language, which is often chosen very emotively. So love is love, for example, as a way of solidifying same-sex marriage. Well, actually, it's not just about love, and that's the wrong argument. Or equal marriage was another term chosen. And actually, all marriages are equal already. You've misrepresented the Equality Act from that perspective for your argument back there. And now the argument or the words chosen, a ban on so-called conversion therapy, expressly emotive language to highlight something which is already outlawed in order to stop or ban something which is perfectly normal practice. Do you want to tell us what the risks are?
Well, I think that in the year ahead, I think there are two challenges that are particularly important to people who support real marriage. The first thing is the conversion therapy ban, which could have an effect on people who believe in marriage. And the second thing is the online safety bill. So let's just talk about the conversion therapy ban. Suppose you were a vicar and one of the people in your congregation was happily married and went to you and said, well, I feel very tempted to leave my wife for another man. I know that's wrong. I don't want to leave my wife, but can we pray about this? Can we talk about this? Now, LGBT activist groups want to say, no, that should be a criminal offence for a vicar to even talk about somebody leaving or resisting a same-sex lifestyle. That's not what the government say they want, but the danger is that their plans could yet change to be made worse. The legislation could be amended. So we want people to be free to talk about the things that they care about. So if they want their marriage to be faithful, then sometimes there will be issues that they want to talk about, issues of temptation maybe. They want to talk about that to somebody else, and that should not be made a criminal offence, which is quite clearly what LGBT activists want to be the case. There are people who believe in marriage, and there are people who want to stay married, come what may, but that doesn't mean to say that's not easy sometimes. They can be quite hard, and they do want to talk, and they do want to have counsel, advice, and prayer, and that sort of thing. And that should be fine and perfectly legal, as it is now. And the government say it will continue to be legal. Well, let's see the detail. We haven't yet seen the detail, and we also don't know what the final outcome will be. But that's certainly an issue that we're watching very carefully.
So one of my concerns, Colin, as a parent, is that under 18s aren't allowed to be spoken to about their sexual orientation unless it is to affirm. And that, for me, is quite a problem.
That's certainly the spin that LGBT activist groups are saying at the moment. The government is saying, no, that isn't the case, but we haven't seen the detail. But suppose a dad wanted to talk to his daughter who was seriously contemplating taking hormone blockers or even sex change hormones. That could, if she does that, that could mean a permanent change. I mean, we've seen recently detransitioners, people who've taken these drugs have now got permanently deep voices. And sadly, some of them have had mastectomies, and they've done things through being coached, through the propaganda, that they bitterly regret later. So why can't a parent talk to their children about these sorts of issues? And that's really the danger. And a lot of people are raising this as a concern about the government's so-called conversion therapy ban. Parents should be able to talk to their children about these important issues. There's nothing wrong with that. It seems that LGBT groups think the only people that should talk to children is them. That's what they want. And parents should be cut out of it. And that's quite wrong. We will have to see what happens in these changes. The consultation period has just ended. We will see what the government's legislation will actually be.
So, Colin, you mentioned there were two things, and I believe the second thing you want to talk about is the online safety bill. Could you tell us what that is and why that's a potential problem?
Well, the online safety bill is a real problem because the government is saying, as well as the widely acknowledged concerns about things like anorexia, sites that promote that, or suicide sites, or sites that promote terrorism, things that everybody can agree upon. They are saying there's a whole load of other things, and they're calling that harm. And they're saying that it is the responsibility of the social media companies to stop people being harmed. And if you make a mistake, they're going to fine social media companies up to 10% of their global income. So that absolutely draconian fines for making mistakes. So what will happen is, what we fear is that they will go a lot further. So it's largely being outsourced to the individual companies. There will be some criminal laws. Basically, what is criminal in ordinary life will also be criminal online. Well, that's fine. We understand that. But it's going to go a lot further than that. It's going to go into a concept of harm. If you're a social media company desperate to avoid any fine, I fear the problem is you're going to go a long way further. Now, think of Nick Clegg. Today, as we're talking, he's just been made, almost seems to be successor to Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook. Certainly a very, very senior position, in charge of all regulation of Facebook.
At least Zuckerberg himself has said he's on a par with Zuckerberg.
Really? Yeah. That's incredible. But this man, Nick Clegg, or Sir Nick Clegg, as he now is, back in 2012, during the same-sex marriage bill, he called supporters of marriage bigots. Now, he had to withdraw the remark, but that's what he thinks, and he's in charge of regulating Facebook. So will he be going through people's Facebook accounts and making sure that they're not criticizing same-sex marriage? And these are concerns, really. And will Nick Clegg be able to say, well, I'm only doing this because there is the online safety bill? So there are these concerns in future, really, and we want to make sure there's free speech. There is a free speech duty in the bill, which is a good thing, but that seems to be quite weak. Those involved in producing social media sites have to have regard to the importance of free speech. Well, you can have regard to something and then ignore it. And it is really so important that free speech duty is made much more stronger and have real teeth. And we need to see that really protected. And we don't want there to have a sort of companies like YouTube or Facebook, which are really, I know they don't have a complete monopoly, but they're near monopolies in many, many ways. And we don't want woke monopolies. You can say anything that we like you to say. We don't want that. You can say anything you like, as long as it's only in conformity with our woke values. We don't want that. And it wouldn't be so bad if there were alternatives where you can upload videos. But YouTube has huge market share at the moment, and it's a near monopoly. And the same with Google. We don't want Google to say, we're changing our algorithms, so if anybody types in marriage, they will not get people who believe that marriage is between one man and one woman. We'll relegate those to sort of the 3,000th results, so nobody will ever see that on the front page. So these are real concerns, really, that true marriage will be censored. We don't want that.
Great. That's a good point to wrap this up. And Colin, I want to firstly thank you for setting it up, and the rest of our board, Andrea from Christian Concern and Don Horrocks and Rod Badams. A wonderful job you've done, and all those previous people who have served on our board as well. It means so much. And before COVID, for 9 months before COVID, after I joined, I was up and down the country, and I spoke personally to over 1,200 people. and the sense of feeling and gratitude that there is a group that they can go to get support, to get information around their ability to speak about their support of one man, one woman marriage is palpable. So it's good that we're here. We've spoken about lots of things to do. The battle is fierce and is ongoing on a daily basis. Thank you for what you're doing. Can I thank all of our listeners today, but all of our supporters over the years, over the last decade. We're doing, I think, a good work. We're doing something which is necessary in society and something which hopefully will have a long-lasting impact on marriage and our whole country. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. I'm sorry that when you joined, wasn't long afterwards, we went into a pandemic, so you haven't had an easy time of it, really. But hopefully all the meetings you've been doing will resume again.
I'm sure. Thank you.